All right, so we want to record this workshop so you can return to this and look back at information if you need. We will be sending out an email to everybody on Friday that has the recording of this video and then any information and resources that were shared here. All right, so my name is Ashley Williamson, and I'm the co-executive director of the Giving Grove. The Giving Grove is a national nonprofit based in Kansas City, Missouri, which is where I am zooming from. And we are an organization that supports orchard programs nationally. And with us today, we have Dean and Fred, who are going to be sharing their knowledge. Fred Conrad. Hi, Fred. Fred is a community garden program manager at Foodwell Alliance, an organization that provides resources to community gardens, orchards, and urban farms in Metro Atlanta. Fred has is an ISA certified arborist, a QCS certified organic grower, and has been trained in horticulture therapy. At home, Fred has honeybees, and he actually has some honeybees with him at his desk right now. Chickens, and he volunteers on the board of the American Community Gardening Association. Dean Gunderson is the Chief Programs Officer at Seed St. Louis, an organization dedicated to connecting people to land, to their food, and to each other. And he attended Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, where he studied agriculture and food geography. Dean enjoys doing garden experiments on his family's property, specifically trialing perennial crops and staple foods like grains and nuts, including almonds. And I am Ashley Williamson, co-executive director of the Giving Grove National. So I'm going to start just by giving you a little bit of an overview of what the Giving Grove is. We are an organization, as I said, that supports community orchard programs nationally. We have right now over 550 little orchards across the United States. So we support program managers like Fred and Dean and making sure that their programs are sustainable so that they can be the local hub for their own regions to help install and maintain these orchards over time. We have a robust network. So right now we have a national reach, and we are partnered with 14 different cities. This is a great way for us to share best practices, to share ideas, to share funding. And this helps us become better program managers and better serve our communities on the ground. If you're interested in learning more about the Giving Grove, or you're interested in getting connected with a program, if we have a hub in your city, you can contact me and I'll get you connected. And if you're interested in bringing a program hub like the Giving Grove to your city, and you have a 501c3 or garden organization that is primed for partnership, you can also contact me and I'll get you started on that. To tell you a little about our impact, we do serve 14 cities coast to coast. That is 550 or more little neighborhood orchards, and our orchards are anywhere from 5 to 15 and sometimes more trees. These are community assets run by volunteers like you. And there's a lot of good impacts beyond just food production with our little orchards. And every single one looks a little different and has a different purpose. And we can thank Fred and Dean for running their programs in St. Louis and Atlanta. We're just excited to share with you today knowledge about grapes. So let's get to make sure I have everyone admitted. Excellent. So we're going to start with kind of just a basic grape overview, and then we're going to get into specifics about grapes called Muscadine. So I'm going to pass it over to Dean, and Dean is going to lead us through some information about grapes. If you have any questions, just pop them in the chat. I'm going to be monitoring the chat, and I'll make sure that Dean hears your question and that it gets answered.
Yeah, well, welcome everybody. Yeah, I'm basically going to talk about all the grapes except muscadines, which just fits into probably what you think of when you talk about grapes. So we go. Sorry. I swear I know how to use Zoom. Vitis or Vitis is the genus that includes all grapes and muscadines, which is a type of grape. So virtually all grapes that you have probably ever had or have ever heard of, seen, anything is either purely or almost completely one species of grape, and that is Vitis vinifera. And that is the grape of the Mediterranean. So that's the grape, of France and Italy and Greece and, the Levant and North Africa and all those areas. And then there are what are called kind of the hybrid grapes. So hybrid grapes are grapes that are a combination, a crossing between the Vitis vinifera, so that European grape, and one or multiple of our native grape species here in the United States. So we have at least about a dozen different species of Vitis here in the eastern part of the United States. And hybridizing these grapes was a very popular thing to do before the advent of synthetic fungicides, because the Mediterranean is not humid and the eastern United States is. And so those European grapes suffered a lot from fungal diseases. And so hybridizing that European grape genetics with our native grape created a lot more disease resistance. And there was a lot of breeding done to try and get the disease resistance of our native wild grapes, while also maintaining kind of the flavor and yield of that European grape. And one of the important people in that was this guy here on the right, T.V. Munson, who we will get back to in a couple slides. So we can go to the next one there. So a couple things with grapes, and this might seem relatively obvious, but just make sure we're all on the same page here. So grapes are vines. These are not trees. They are not shrubs, which means that even though they are woody, that wood is not strong enough to support itself. It cannot hold itself upright like a tree would. And this means two things. One, it means that you will need to provide the support. Unless you're wanting to grow it up a tree, like people used to do, as you can see in this picture here, and then have a monstrous ladder that you do all of your pruning and harvesting from, you will need some sort of structure, some sort of trellis to hold it upright so it's not sprawling on the ground. Because if you let it sprawl on the ground, it's going to have all sorts of pest and disease issues. And also because they are not putting as much energy into the wood, to make the wood sturdy, they have more energy to just grow faster. So these are incredibly vigorous plants, which means that you will need to be pruning them much more heavily than you would be pruning a tree or a shrub. And they also need, next slide, a lot of the same things that really any fruit producing plant would need. You're going to want to give them as close to full sun as you can. These are full sun plants. That's why they are vines, so that they can grow to the top of the tree and get maximum sun. It's also going to want well-drained soil. And what I mean by that isn't like you don't need to like grow it in rock or anything, but you definitely don't want the soil to be soggy. You don't want it to be like at the bottom of a hill that gets wet or that ever has standing water. You want like relatively free draining soils. And this is one of the reasons, along with good airflow, which is the next thing you want. Those two reasons are one of the main reasons why you see vineyards in hilly and mountainous areas, is because those areas have soils that are very well draining and have very good airflow. And that airflow helps with disease management primarily. And just like with virtually all plants, you want a good quality soil. You don't want to be growing this in really awful, heavy clay rubble or something. And so if your soil is not great to begin with, it's good to, add some compost, add some manure, mulching, cover cropping, whatever you would want to do to improve your soil quality. So we can go to the next one. So with all of those, quick basics done for grapes. What we really like to grow where we are in St. Louis, which is a hot, humid summer area. So if you are in a climate, which from the people who put in the chat, it sounds like pretty much we all are in those hot, humid summer areas, we really like the hybrid grapes. We find it is much, much more difficult to be growing like the seedless table grapes or like the conventional wine grapes that you think of as like Pinot Noirs, and like all of those are harder to grow without significant inputs. And so we really like the hybrid grapes because they are very much more disease resistant while still having a good yield. And again, disease resistance is absolutely vital unless you're wanting to do a really rigorous spraying schedule. And when I'm saying a really rigorous spraying schedule, I'm talking about, so I'm in St. Louis. Believe it or not, the eastern part of Missouri is a wine growing region. And the people there who grow the conventional European wine grapes are needing to spray their grapes with fungicides on the order of dozens of times per season to get a commercially harvestable crop. Versus with these more naturally disease-resistant ones, they're spraying 2 or 3 times a year to get a commercially viable crop. And if you're not selling it commercially, you can usually get away with not spraying them at all, which we'll get into. Of the grapes that we have found are the most successful for us in terms of low inputs and also having good yields are mostly grapes that we call Munson grapes. So that's what all of these are here, except for this one at the bottom. This is the outlier. So Edelweiss is a good green grape. That's what this picture up there is of the green grape. So Edelweiss was bred up in, I believe, Minnesota, and yet still does great in our hot, humid areas and is very disease resistant. But all of those other ones were bred by T.V. Munson at Grayson College in North Texas. So I saw several people from Texas in the chat. These were all bred just north of Dallas, and so they do just fine in Texas. So that's these, Fern Munson, Luke Fata, Lamanto, Elvacond, Brilliant, Ben-Hur, Carmen, Atoka, America, Champanel, all do great. And these are all complex hybrids of the European vinifera and various native grape species. So that area of North Texas actually has, I think, 6 or 7 wild grape species in it. And so there's a lot of different genetics kind of churning in those that have given them quite a bit of diversity. So you can see even with the colors, there's red ones, there's pink ones, there's blue ones, there's black ones. So you can get a pretty good diversity. However, these are all seeded grapes. There are no seedless ones. There are some seedless ones that are more disease resistant and so are worth a try, but those are going to need still much more disease management than the ones listed here will need. So if we want to go to the next one. So planting. So these varieties, as they are crossed with our wild grapes, which are very vigorous, they should be planted further apart than the standard grape spacing. So somewhere between 8 and 12 feet apart on a trellis. We usually do about 10 feet just to make our lives easier. And you don't actually need to plant 2 varieties. Most of these, they should all be self-pollinating, but we like to do at least 2. Just if for no other reason to make sure that we get a crop every year, get some different ripening windows in there. As with all fruit trees, you don't want to let them produce before their 3rd year in the ground. So if you're starting to see the little grape bundles or little flowers on them, pick those off at least the first 2 years. And then maintain a weed-free area about 3 foot in diameter around each plant. And then at least for the first year, you want to have regular watering to get those roots nice and established. The next one. So then the trellis. So I will say there are so many different trellis options out there. Probably any of them would work, but the one that we really like is the Munson trellis. So it was the one that was bred by the guy who bred these grapes for the grapes that he bred. We find that it is easier to prune and manage with how vigorous these vines are than a lot of the other more 2-dimensional trellises. So as opposed to just like, stacked, 2-dimensional trellis, what this looks like is more kind of like an old clothesline. So you've got the posts going up and down, and then you've got wires going off the end of each end, kind of, going this way like a clothesline, and then you have one going in the center about 6 inches below those two side wires. So you grow it up, like you see in this picture on the right, the trunk goes up, and then you have permanent branches on just this middle wire. And those outer wires, there is nothing that should ever be like tied or growing directly on that wire. What that is for is like this picture on the left is like you're looking down the trellis. All of the new leafy growth that comes out, you just let it come out and hang over those outer wires. So what that does is it directs the growth out, which means that the grapes are going to get maximum airflow and sun, which means they're going to dry out more quickly. So you're going to have fewer disease issues, you're going to have fewer pest issues, and you get more even ripening on those grapes. And it also makes it much easier to prune, which you'll see in the next slide. So the pruning that we like to do, particularly with this type of trellis, is spur pruning. And one, because it works really well, and it's also pretty simple. So you're going to train the grape to have just the one trunk. So like we showed in the last picture, where you're going to grow the grape up to that middle wire, and then you're going to tie it, and then you're going to have just one branch going out in either direction on that middle wire, and then all of the growth that comes out is going to go up and out off of those two side wires. And then every year in like late February, early March, where we are, it'll be probably earlier if you're south of us, later if you're north of us, but basically before the leaves break in the spring, but after the coldest part of winter is over, you're just going to go down the middle, and all those branches that are coming out, you're just going to cut them back to about 2 or 3 buds. And that's it. That's the whole pruning process. So you're going to prune them back to about 2 or 3 buds per stub, and then you can also thin them out. So it's going to look something like this on the left before you prune in the spring, and then after you prune, it's going to look something like here on the right. You can see here where they are spaced out. So if you have 2 little stubs and they're like right next to each other, you do want to cut one of those out to have no more than about 1 every 6 inches along this main branch. But that's the whole pruning process. So with grapes, like I said, with how vigorous they are, you are going to be removing a lot of material, and that is absolutely normal and okay. So next slide.
Hey, Dean, question, what do you do with the discard after you've pruned it out?
Yeah. So one, if you want more grapes, you can root them very easily. You just stick them in the ground with these types of grapes. Or if you're like looking to dispose of it, you are going to want to remove it from the orchard. So either burn it or chip it up, or yard waste dumpsters or something like that. You don't want to leave it laying in the orchard. You want to remove it from the space in case there's any overwintering insect pests or fungal diseases on that tissue. So pests and diseases, I think this is my last slide here. So if you are growing the varieties that we talked about, you're going to have pretty minimal disease control issues. If you're growing the more seedless varieties or the more like classic European wine varieties, you're going to have much more disease to deal with. The main disease issues you're going to see, regardless of what you're growing, are fungal diseases. Grapes are susceptible to fungal diseases. So that comes in 2 forms. One is there's various foliar diseases like mildews, powdery mildew, downy mildew, things like that. And then you can also see black rot, which is a fungal infection of the fruit. So black rot, when it's early in its infection, will look kind of something like this, where the green grapes will be kind of like half brown and look kind of weird. The mildews are going to look like mildews on any leaves, where it's kind of like splotchy white kind of fungal looking things on the leaves. Unfortunately, once the infection has already happened, there's really not much to be done other than removal of that infected material. There's not really a spray that will like cure it necessarily, but there are sprays that can help prevent its spread. And there are things that you can do to as preventative. So if you have had issues with fungal diseases in the past, it is good to start some of these preventative techniques. The lowest intervention one is actually dairy, is antifungal. And so if you get like powdered milk or powdered whey, about 2 tablespoons per gallon of liquid, you spray it on the leaves, the grapes, the vines, everything, and it will help prevent fungal infections. And this is something that's even used in organic grape vineyards in New Zealand. So this is like an actually effective thing if used as a preventative. If you already have fungal issues and you're spraying it on there, it's not going to do much. Sulfur is a more powerful organic fungicide that can also be used. In terms of insect pests, the main ones that you're going to see is potentially grape berry moths, which will look something kind of like this. You'll get kind of webbing and stuff in amongst the fruit. If you start noticing that as a problem, one of the best things to do is sanitation. So, you know, all the leaves and stuff when they fall in the winter, chop those up with a lawnmower or rake them up and remove them, because that's where they're going to overwinter. And you can also use BT, which is an organic insecticide that just targets specific caterpillars like the grape berry moth. If you're in an area with heavy Japanese beetle pressure, Japanese beetles love grapes and they can eat a lot of the leaves, but that's usually not an issue because of how vigorous grapes are. But if it starts becoming an issue, like where you're noticing like big yield reductions or something, before they show up, because they're usually pretty predictable. Like here in St. Louis, they show up about mid-June and then they're gone by the end of July. So like before they start showing up, you can do some neem sprays. You can also do some mass trapping. And the Giving Grove has some great resources on how to do mass trapping appropriately, because if you do it wrong, it will make the problem worse. And then the other issue that you can have is birds. So that's another reason why I like this trellising system, is because the grapes are all concentrated right in that middle area. And you can use what's called humming line, which is a little plastic string kind of thing that looks like cassette tape ribbon, but it's sturdier than that. And we just string it right over the top of the grapes. And just when the wind hits it, it makes this humming noise that birds just hate for some reason. And so if you have issues with birds and you're with this style of trellis where the grapes would all be really close to that top wire, you can just put that humming line over it and the birds aren't going to touch it. So yeah.
Dean, where can you get that milk spray? Where do you source it? And what do you need to spray it on?
Yeah, so the milk spray is literally just milk. So like I go to the grocery store and I buy like the powdered milk for like $3 in the, you know, just in the baking aisle. And it's just 2 tablespoons of that dissolved in some water. You can also just use like the milk from the gallon, but that goes bad. So I keep the powdered milk just like out in my garden shed. And then to spray it, I just use like a pump sprayer, like that they sell for, you know, like herbicides and stuff. Don't use one that's had herbicides in it because that'll kill your grapes. But I get one of those and you just put like the 2 tablespoons of the powdered milk in it. And then you fill, you know, a gallon's worth of liquid, shake it up to dissolve it. And then you just pump it up and just spray it on the foliage.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, that's Dean's presentation. Again, any questions that you have as you're absorbing this information, just pop it in the chat. We'll make sure that Fred and Dean answer these questions. And now we're gonna move on to Muscadine. So Fred, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, great. So this photograph here is just, we have an annual fruit tree sale, and that's the way muscadines are sold, with those long, hard to handle vining trailers that make it possible to get it up onto the trellis when you first plant it. So Felder Rushing, fairly well-known vegetable and fruit guy in the South, said that muscadines put the South in your mouth. And I feel that is very true. I hope most of you have had muscadines. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna start by differentiating between muscadines and bunch grapes. So the big difference, I think, between muscadines and grapes is that muscadines are better. They have more flavor. It's got a thicker skin. It's a different experience eating it. And they are seedy, as Dean said, that the grapes that they grow are. These are very seedy. And the foliage is shiny, I think, is probably the real big difference between the two. So the foliage is smooth top and bottom. And so in the South, we're rain and the dew just beads up and rolls off the foliage of muscadine. So you don't have as many problems with fungus on the foliage or anything like that. The grape itself has adapted to make it, you know, to this humidity here, and it grows better that way. On the maintenance side, it is possible, and Dean said that you could do this with grapes too, but muscadines really have very few problems that require spraying for most people. So it is possible to actually grow grapes organically and even certified organically. They were native to the Southeast, along with like fox grapes and porcelain berries. And it's a very vigorous vine. It can, in the wild, they grow up into trees, and the wood, although Dean said that the wood isn't strong enough to hold itself up, it is strong enough that if once you cut it out of a tree, the vines hang in the tree for years and years and years without breaking up and coming down. And the grapevines themselves are extremely they're just so fibrous. They actually oftentimes, if they grow up into a tree, that they will break the top of the tree out multiple times. You know, the tree will try to grow up through the grapes, and then the grapes will just pull the top of the tree back down. You see a lot of interesting scaffolding in older trees, some places in the South where muscadines have really had at them. And then I'm going to get into this a little bit later about the types of muscadines. In the South, you often hear muscadines referred to as muscadines or scuppernongs. And I just want to be, there are a lot of people on the call from the South. It looks like really muscadines encompass all of this family of Vitis rotundifolia, but the muscadine is one specific heirloom. I'm sorry, the scuppernong is just one particular heirloom species, and not a very protective one, but good flavor. So I don't think I have slides for this, but the harvesting of muscadines is not done like bunch grapes. You can't pick that whole cluster off because they're not all ripe at the same time. So muscadines are generally harvested individually, loose, and they ripen just inconsistently. So you have to go through, and typically you can, if you have a decent sized trellis with a number of plants on it, you can harvest over anywhere from a 3-week, 4-week, sometimes more than that. You know, if you plant enough different varieties, you might be able to get a 10-week harvest out, just harvesting little by little like that. And when muscadines are sold at the market or at the grocery store, they're packed loose, and they're usually put in quart containers the way strawberries are. So you have these, you buy them in quarts, individual grapes, no stem. And the ripening season for us here, at least, in Georgia, school usually starts early and in August. So muscadines are a nice crop, a nice plant to grow on a school orchard, because the harvest comes in when the kids are back in school. So for us, usually the harvest starts late August and goes through the end of September in most cases. And then we have both muscadines, like bunch grapes. You know, you can get varieties that have a very high sugar content that are grown for wine, and usually those are used for dessert wines. And then you can also grow ones that are more like table grapes. On the disease side, the reason why we don't grow bunch grapes here at all is that there is a disease, a bacterial disease called Pierce's disease, that infects the plant. It's got an insect vector, but it gets into the bunch grapes, and this bacteria, the load builds up over time. It takes about 3 years to kill the vine, usually here in the South. Usually you can count on 3 years. So you can still grow bunch grapes here, but the way you do it is you go ahead and plant them, and you don't restrict them from bearing fruit the first couple of years. So you take what you can get, and usually you get 3 years of harvest, and then the whole plant will just abruptly just drop dead. So there's not much you can do. It's very pervasive. Nobody really grows commercial bunch grapes here. Okay, next slide. So muscadine characteristics, if you're talking about muscadines, we don't call them purple and green. We refer to them as black and bronze. They do come in self-pollinating. The majority of the varieties are self-pollinating, but there are female flower-only varieties out there. And when you're harvesting, they either have what they call a dry stem scar or a wet stem scar, and you can look this up. All it is that some of them just break completely free from the stem, and some of them will tear a little bit of the skin off, just a teeny little bit of the skin off. And it really doesn't make much difference, but if you're gonna market them, the dry stem scar varieties are probably a little bit better for that. The female plants, and because there's some very popular female varieties of muscadines. You have to accompany those with some of the self-pollinated ones, but the fruit is a little sweeter in general. It's also a little less abundant. So, you know, you like to mix those female varieties in with the self-fertile. And just like bunch grapes, all the flowers and all the fruit are in the current season's growth. So you have to do an aggressive pruning every year to get a lot of new growth, to get a lot of flowers and a lot of fruit. If you don't prune of muscadines, what you end up with is a lot of foliage and a little bit of fruit. And then muscadines, and I didn't hear Dean say this, but typically if you see them sort of, if you get yellowing of the foliage, the thing you're looking for is mostly that there's probably, they're not getting enough magnesium. So you can just put some Epsom salts around in the garden, in the orchard, and it doesn't take a lot of that to replenish the magnesium in the soil. But typically, if you're getting yellow foliage, that's the go-to cure for that. Okay, so we use a different kind of trellis a little bit, but I have seen those Munson trellises used here, and the other one is called a Niffen trellis, and the commercial growers just use this single wire process, a single wire. So they put real heavy duty posts on the ends, and then they put middle posts, line posts down the center, and they just drape the wire across the top of the line post and tack it on with a poultry staple. And the spacing is about 20 feet on most of the commercial growers, 15 feet probably minimum for most of them. They grow aggressively. They do grow out onto the sides. You do get that into the rows. You know, you want to set the rows about 12 feet apart so you can still get between them. But we don't have those other extra wires to support them on. Also, these wires are relatively low. You also see people doing, you know, muscadines on arbors, which is very challenging to prune and very challenging to harvest. So mostly for what we're doing, we mostly grow them on the Niffen trellises. And then I also, yeah, the side growth typically is not pruned during the growing season. Normally muscadines, you don't prune them at all during the growing season because you want all that foliage to either make sugar for the fruit or to strengthen the plant. Usually the only time you would be pruning side growth on muscadine is if it comes in contact with the ground, because it's going to want to root in and it's going to make it harder to mow and clean up underneath of there. So what we use mostly is that Niffen system, the 2-wire system. So we have 2 wires, but they're vertically one above the other one. And we usually do one at about 18 inches off the ground and the other one at about 4 feet off the ground, 5 feet. And we do, instead of a single T, we usually do a double T scaffold. So we grow, the vine has got 2 of those lateral fruiting canes. So it's got a double T scaffold. And we find that we get a lot of muscadines on the lower tiers. The commercial growers say that they don't get enough on that lower tier to make it worth their while. So they just go with the one wire. But we find that the 2-wire works good, and it makes shaping the vine kind of fun in the winter to get that pruning. It's because it's got a nice shape. You can visualize it real well. You can see it, and you have more of the bud, the antlers that you're looking for. So this is very much like grapes. I mean, ideally, you would grow them on slopes. I mean, that is the ultimate best place to grow muscadines is on slopes. You want that water to run off. You want full sun if you can get it. That's hard in an urban environment, especially, but you can get that. They're going to do better. We only prune muscadines during the winter. And I don't know if I'm going to come back to this later, but the prunings that we do in the winter. So you have to prune like 90% of the plant off. Of 90% of the woody part of the plant goes away during the pruning, the winter pruning. Usually, if you prune early in the winter, and then you by chance have a very hard freeze later, you'll have more damage than if you prune later. So for us, we usually prune the first week in February because most of our really hard weather is December and January. So we usually do February. If the later you prune, the more, they weep. But if you prune too early, like I said, you're running the risk of potential freeze damage. For us, the getting rid of I'm just going to respond to that person's question about the removal of all those vines and all that stuff. Running through a chipper is a real challenge. They're very tangly and it's hard to push them down through the chute, and they want to grab hold of you. They'll tear up your hands and your arms. They block up, they clog up the chippers. Chippers is not a great way to do it. Unlike grapes, you cannot root. You cannot root these winter cuttings. They don't, no matter what you do, you're not gonna root at all. So you just need to dispose of them. And we usually, because chipping them is such a hassle, we've been hauling them off site most of our time in our orchard. And then summer irrigation and fertilizing. So the commercial people say that if you fertilize with a general purpose fertilizer in the summer, you can add about 10 pounds per plant to your harvest. And if you irrigate during the summer, you can add about 10 pounds of harvest per plant. So a combination of fertilizing and irrigating, you can bump up your poundage. We actually, at our vineyard, we do not do either one of those, and we do fairly well. Ours, we actually only get about 20 to 30 pounds per vine, but we're planting at 10-foot spacing instead of 20-foot spacing, and we're not fertilizing or irrigating. So we're pretty okay with where we are. Okay, so propagation. Muscadines, when you buy them, they are grown on their own roots. They're not grafted. Usually when you buy them, they've been field layered, and either the method here in the photograph where the air layered, or a lot of times people will just like let the vines run on the ground and they'll set a brick on top of it or something on top of a node and let it root in there, and then they'll dig that up in the fall and put it into a pot or move it to a new location. You can grow them from summer cuttings, but just like the vine likes, the plant itself likes good drainage, the cutting likes good drainage. So you gotta like root it into like a perlite or a soil that is super well drained, and you can't do it in water. It's got to be like, in a kind of a quasi dry potting mix. And then, like I said, you just got to chuck the stuff that you prune off in the winter. You just can't do anything with it at all. And I have heard that they can be grown from seed, but nobody I know, I could not find anybody who grows muscadines from seed. I don't know if they come true to variety or not. I doubt it, but I couldn't find anybody who grows them that way. And usually you can buy them in #1 containers or bare root. And bare root does fine. They have a very, 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 very vigorous root system.
Hey, Fred, can you talk a little about what you said just there, that planting the seed might not be true to the variety?
I have never done it. Now, like I said, I couldn't find anybody who had done it, but I have read that you could do it. I'm not speaking from experience, but I have read that you can grow them from seed. But I do not know if they come true from variety. I just don't know. There are a lot of varieties of muscadines that are patented. And I don't know what the repercussions of that would be either.
Thank you.
So the favorite varieties for us that we grow, and I've been growing muscadines, I don't know, for probably, I don't know, 15, 20 years, something in that range. And my favorite, all-time favorite is a variety called Carlos. It's a self-pollinating bronze. It is a wine grape. You pop this thing in your mouth and bite down. It is like an explosion of sugar. It is like insanely flavorful, super sweet. It is just a delicious. They do tend to, if you let it get a little overripe, when you're eating it, you're going to get another flavor in there, a little bit of not fermentation necessarily, but the flavor is going to change a little bit when it gets a little overripe. Cowart is a super popular here with growers, self-pollinating black variety. Fry is another one you see a lot of. Nesbitt is another one you see a lot of. Polk is I don't know about the whole world, but here in Georgia, at least, if you go to the grocery store and they happen to have muscadines, very often what you're going to get in that quart container is going to be this variety. And if you're going to get a bronze, it's actually most likely, if it's a small, you can tell by the size usually. If it's a smaller one, it's probably going to be that Triumph, and if it's a bigger one, it's probably going to be Carlos. And then Ison is another one. I would just throw in here that so like with plum trees, Auburn University holds a patent on a lot of those. In muscadines, University of Georgia has the patent on a lot of the patented muscadine varieties. There's a lot of research, and there are a lot of muscadine growers here, and wineries that make muscadine wine here. So it's a fairly big crop for us. It's a good crop for us. It's a very reliable crop for us. Like I said, it's aside from the annual pruning and creating something for it to trellis onto, muscadines are pretty low effort crop. I mean, you have to if you have anything like a decent place to grow them, and you just prune them in the winter. If you don't prune them in the winter, you're not going to get anything. But as long as you're doing that winter pruning, you are probably going to get a decent crop of muscadines, and there's no thorns, and they are, like I say, you can't really go wrong with the pruning. So, pretty much this is one of the easiest things to grow from my perspective. And jumping on. And then the only couple that I don't really care for that we've tried, the jumbo, it's a black female variety. It's got a really big, almost plum-sized grape, and it just doesn't have the flavor, and you don't get a lot of them. They're not that many on there, and they don't have a lot of sugar in them. And I think people like the way they look in pictures, but I don't care for them. And then the Granny Val variety, which is another one that actually it is, you can buy it all over the place. It's commonly available and people do grow it, but that one, it tends to overproduce. So you've either got to thin the fruit, and this is very unusual for muscadines. It's like the only one like this that I know of, is you got to either thin the fruit, or it'll get into like a pecan tree where you have like a big harvest one year, and then the plant needs another year to recover, and then it'll have a big harvest. So you get into this kind of like every other year kind of harvest thing with them. And this one, if you did any side pruning or summer pruning, this is one of those few vines that you could screw up on the pruning, because if you went down and like trim them out of your way so you could get down the aisles better in the summer, you could actually, the plant would just work itself to death basically, and it would just crash and burn. So you could actually kill it. So once again, I'm thinking, why make it hard for yourself? Why not go all those other varieties that are easier? So, and then recently there have been these pink varieties coming out. Ruby Crisp is a new one, and like I said, people are buying them like crazy, but I haven't I haven't seen the harvest, and we haven't grown them long enough to know how good they are. And I think that's pretty much what I got to say about muscadines.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Fred. Thank you, Dean. We really appreciate your information. We've had some questions in the chat we'll go over, but do take note of our emails here. I'm Ashley Williamson, so if you're interested in learning more about how to bring the Give and Grow program to your city, you can contact me. Fred is our Muscadine guy, so if you have any questions for Fred, you can send them to him. And there's Dean, who was talking about the grapes. So these are our emails. I will be sending out a recording and information after this presentation, and I'll include contact information for them as well. So I'm gonna stop sharing right now, and we're gonna take a look at some of these questions. So one of the questions is about suckers. So are there suckers you have to prune off on grapevines is the question.
I mean, you can get yeah, I'm not sure if I would call it a sucker necessarily, but you can get, growth coming from the trunk or kind of from the bottom. For at least like the hybrid grapes that we grow, they're on their own roots. So like that growth isn't a problem. If you're growing like a European grape, like a seedless grape or something like that, those are all grafted onto a rootstock. Otherwise they'll die of some diseases we have here. So in that instance, then you definitely have to cut off any of that growth from the bottom because it's a completely different grape.
Thank you, Dean. And then someone was asking about the similarities between Dallas muscadines and Georgia muscadines. Fred, do you have any comment on that?
I would guess that they're the same muscadines, but I do not know this for a fact. I've never grown muscadines in Dallas, but if they have a shiny leaf, I think I think muscadines are probably closer to the wild grape. I mean, there's certainly the muscadines that we grow for fruit production are very, very similar to the muscadines that grow wild in the woods and on the fence post here. Like if you just were going by foliage only, you would not know. You could not differentiate between the wild muscadines and the cultivated varieties.
Yeah, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, Fred, but I think muscadines are relatively new as a commercial crop compared to like grapes. So I don't know if there's been that much like breeding. It's been more like you find good ones and they propagate them, right?
Yeah. Another question is, Fred, you're a good salesman. So how can you know if you're in the right climate to grow muscadines? And someone's asking about, can you do this in St. Louis?
I got to throw that one at Dean. I don't know if you can grow muscadines. I don't know where the cutoff is. We are in 7B or 8 here, zone 8. So I've never had winter damage at all on them at all.
Yeah, I think according to official data, I think zone 7 is kind of the cutoff. But I have had some overwinter in St. Louis, but we also just officially became zone 7. So I don't know. We still get below 0, but it's just for like a couple days. And I have had ones overwinter. But yeah, I think it's kind of somewhere between that zone 6, 7 is the cutoff from what I've seen. But it's definitely not a common thing around here. Like I've never seen anyone growing them at any scale.
Yeah, and maybe Fred, can you talk a little more about Pierce disease and how to prevent that?
Well, there's no preventing it. So it's a bacterial disease that affects the vascular system of the plant. So it is like elm disease, Dutch elm disease, or the blight that affects chestnut trees. It's inside the plant. The bacterial load just continues to increase over time, and at about the 3-year mark, it just it clogs up the xylem and the phloem. There's no flow of nutrient or fluids, and the plant dies in its entirety here. Like, it's not little bits and pieces, or the tips die back. It's just a full death. It's usually the vector is leaf hoppers, and I don't know what else, little small insects that just are inconsequential to the health of the plant, but the disease they bring, like the pine bark borers and the stuff like that, the disease is what kills it. And I don't know, the commercial growers here for muscadines spray usually with Captan and 7. So Captan as a fungicide, 7 as a insecticide. But I can't imagine what you would have to. I can't imagine a scenario where the grapes wouldn't get Pierce's disease eventually here, and that is the Southeast. I don't know and I understand Pierce's disease is relatively limited to the Southeast. Like, I don't think that it exists in other places, but in the Southeast, I don't think there's a workaround.
Is that all bunch grapes? Like, if it, like, even like native hybrids and stuff, or is it mostly just European?
That I know of, yes. It's all of them, but once again, it doesn't seem to affect the wild, the fox grapes and all, which have the big fuzzy leaf. I mean, that one looks like a grape, but or a bunch grape, but they never bear fruit really much. But that I know of, no. I mean, I talked to some people working up to this thing. I just asked some of the growers that we source plant material for our orchards, and nobody seemed to feel confident that there was a way to grow a bunch grape here beyond the 3 years. But like I said, in my experience, you can get a pretty decent harvest because the grapes are fast growing plants and they want to bear fruit really early on, and you can get 2 years of harvest off of it, but then you just have to count on replacing it at that point.
That's good advice. Someone's asking about that the trellis system, knows they should be 8 to 10 feet apart, but can you plant them like back to back on each side of the trellis, or do they still need to be split?
Well, once again, the trellises should be about 12 feet apart from each other. The plants should be at least 10 feet. The commercial people do 20-foot spacing. The thing is that they grow into each other very aggressively, and some vines are more aggressive than other varieties. Some varieties are just more aggressive than others, and it's hard enough. I mean, ours are all so intertangled as it is. I mean, 10-foot spacing is like, to me, the minimum you could get away with. And I don't know if that's true with grapes, but with the muscadines, there's no post where the vine is. The posts are on the side, and the muscadines in the center, without a post. I don't know, is the grape climbing a post, or is it in the free wire part?
For the bunch grapes, it's in the free wire part. So you would like train it to get up to the wire, usually with like just a string or a bamboo pole or something. And then once it gets up there, I tie it on.
Okay. And one other question. So what should you consider when ordering these? Is there, when you're looking at nurseries or other big box stores that might be selling them, what are some things to consider? I know you guys suggested different varieties, but in terms of like best season to plant and what to look out for and avoid.
I mean, for grapes, for me, I would say, I mean, the main thing is getting the right variety. If you're at least like around here, the big box stores are, it's supply and demand. People come in and they know the grapes from the grocery store, and so that's what they say they want to buy, and so that's what the box store carries. But that's not a good grape to grow here. They're selling it because they can. So it's really kind of knowing what varieties you want, and then finding that variety is really the the most important thing, as opposed to relying on particularly a big box store. Like more local nurseries are usually better at that. So knowing what variety you want. In terms of when to plant, for us, we do, the spring season here is, basically from now until it gets hot, which is a little unpredictable in St. Louis, but is usually sometime in May. And then again in the fall, we can plant, once it cools down, but before the ground is frozen. So again, kind of unpredictable. For grapes, I prefer to plant in the spring, just because a lot of the grapes that we are growing were bred much further south than here. And so we've had some, when we plant in the fall, sometimes we've had them die off. And I would say kind of the same, like if you were in a more northern area and you were wanting to like try muscadines, my opinion would be do that in the spring as opposed to in the fall. So they have more time to get established. But I don't know if you have opinions on areas where it's good for muscadines.
For me, we source all our plant material from growers in Georgia, and I just feel more comfortable with that. You can get pretty much any variety you want, and varieties you don't want. And but as long as they were grown here, I feel pretty confident about it. I don't know if you lived elsewhere how you would handle that, but we have a lot of producers here, a lot of growers, and so it's easy to get locally grown.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Fred and Dean. Are there any last questions before we close?
I have a question. Do you mind if I just ask it here?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So we ordered 1-year-old plants. It's a seedless Concord from a nursery that came to us a little early before our last frost date. So I've put them in little nursery pots. But here in Georgia, Fred, could I put them in the ground now that it's past the equinox?
Yes. They're going to be much happier in the ground. They root very vigorously, and they're going to start to throw out a lot of growth. And I think being in the ground is definitely the best place for them.
Okay, thank you.
And good luck.
Thank you.
Any other questions out there?
One more. I'm sorry. I have to ask. Dean, the Munson grapes, did you say that they grow very well in Texas? Is that something that I heard you say?
That's where they were bred, so I assume they grow well there.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not in Texas, but yeah.
Well, I am.
Yeah,
Obviously, I am. I'm.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
But yeah, they were bred at Grayson College. They actually still have a vineyard there to maintain those genetics.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you, Fred. Thank you, Dean, for sharing your wisdom. We appreciate you. Reach out to us, reach out to Dean, reach out to Fred, reach out to the Giving Grove, and visit our website, givinggrove.org, to find out more about our program. And I will be sending out the recording and some additional resources for all of you. And happy spring. Good luck with your planting. An exciting time. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thanks.